the first speaker for tonight is Sara Flounders, and she's a longstanding political activist and author based in New York City, and she's a leader of the United National Anti-War Coalition and the International Action Center. And she is the author of numerous books, including Capitalism on a Ventilator, The Impact of COVID-19 in China, the US. This is a co-authored with Li Shuhin, and NATO and the Balkans, the Voices of Opposition. That's co-authored with Ramsey Clark. And I think, Sara, you have a new book coming up, is that right?
That's right. Yes, it's released last month, Sanctions, a Wrecking Ball in a Global Economy.
Okay, great. So Sara, the floor now is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you also to International Manifesto Group for the opportunity of this discussion of will there be war in the Taiwan Straits? While escalating the US-NATO war against Russia in Ukraine, the United States is preparing at breakneck speed for war with China. Taiwan is the excuse. Taiwan is the pawn. US strategy is to expand NATO to China's periphery, create an Asian version of NATO to block, disrupt economic cooperation in Asia. This is a terrible danger to the people of Taiwan and all the people of China. Peoples throughout the entire region face a crisis that can destroy their lives and future and ruin their economies. The US-NATO war in Ukraine devastated the economy of Ukraine, but also disrupted the European Union, who went along with the sanctions demanded by the United States. Poor and working people in the US will be forced to pay for this war, as they pay for every war with steadily deteriorating conditions. The ominous mobilization taking place on the military and political level and the manufactured crisis over a Chinese hot air balloon is a new level in psychological war, propaganda war, to prepare the US population that China is an enemy, a danger, a threat. Why build such animosity against China? Why use scaremongering tactics that incite fear and hostility? Political voices, both Democrats and Republicans, try to outdo each other, condemning the balloon's passage as an invasion, a spy mission, a violation of US sovereignty. Any action by China is described now as threatening, provocative, expansionist. The same words are used again and again in news articles, politician statements. More ominously, in the same week, the four-star Air Force General, Michael Minahan, who's the head of Air Mobility Command, issued a leaked memo where he predicted war with China over Taiwan in 2 years. General Minahan oversees 107,000 airmen and 1,100 cargo and tanker and transport planes. This leaked memo is preparations for war in 2025, includes training, drills, and specific orders. Defeat China, prepare to fight and win, be prepared for deployment at a moment's notice. The Air Force, the Army, the Marines are on board. General Minahan praised the January 5th largest ever launch from a US base of huge C-17 transport aircrafts as training for a naval blockade of China. This is the opening round of massive missile and air assault on mainland China. It's the Pentagon's air-sea battle strategy. Now, China condemned this as reckless, provocative, and meant to put pressure. The Pentagon spokesperson said it's needed to preserve a peaceful, free, and open Indo-Pacific. Military preparations against China include US pressure for Japan to double its military budget, to become the third largest military in the world, in violation of the Japanese Constitution. The new agreement, announced February 2nd, grants U.S. military access to 9 bases in the Philippines to counter China. Foreign bases are a direct violation of the Philippine Constitution. In 1992, a massive people's movement forced the U.S. to close its bases in the Philippines. Now there's 9 new bases. There's been lots of balloon coverage, but no coverage of U.S. threats to China. What's not covered? In any of the U.S. corporate media, the daily U.S. measures to openly threaten China. While one air balloon is considered an invasion, the impact of U.S. aircraft carriers, battle groups with destroyers, fighter jets, nuclear submarines in China's territorial waters is not covered. The U.S. Pacific Fleet consists of 200 ships, submarines, 1,200 aircraft, more than 130,000 sailors and civilians. No coverage. The U.S. regularly sends naval patrols and destroyers through the 180-kilometer wide Taiwan Straits. This is a provocation and an arrogant display of U.S. military power. So how do we view this? Most important is to assert again and again, China is one. China has not threatened Taiwan. China has only asserted what is recognized by the US and 180 other countries, and by the United Nations, and by all international bodies, that Taiwan is part of China. Now, there are daily announcements and coverage in the US media here that China is planning to invade Taiwan. There's no such plan. In the drive to find an excuse for war, the US government is reversing a position signed and agreed to more than 50 years ago. Washington is openly violating 3 different signed agreements, joint communiques it made with China in 1972, 1979, 1982, affirming that China is one country and Taiwan is a province of China. These commitments were the political foundation of China's diplomatic relations with the United States and with every country. So it's the US who's broken its promises to not interrupt China's efforts to reunify the island peacefully. China has spent decades developing its economic relations with Taiwan. The trade between the island of Taiwan and mainland China has grown, along with political and cultural relations. But the Pentagon is turning Taiwan into a porcupine, bristling with billions of military equipment. Another $10 billion was just promised. This is why we say Taiwan is a US pawn. There's more than 30 draft bills and resolutions in the US Congress related to Taiwan before the US midterm elections. And they all had one thing in common: to shore up support for Taiwan and to present Taiwan as an independent entity. These congressional bills are promoted by the Washington-based Formosa Association for Public Affairs. And the bills have names such as the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act, the Arm Taiwan Act, the Taiwan Peace Through Strength Act, and so on. So what's really behind? What is driving this growing hostility and war preparation? It's because China is surpassing the US in GDP and the development of its economy. Today, nearly 2/3 of countries trade more with China than with the United States or any other country. China's growing trade with other countries poses a threat and a challenge to US hegemony. This capitalist system is relentlessly driven to expand or die, and now it is shrinking. So for the multi-billionaires and corporate CEOs, this is a life or death crisis. The ability of China to provide trillions of dollars in development funds means that now developing, formerly colonized countries can have more favorable trade relations without the IMF and World Bank's onerous conditions. This is a threat to every U.S. bank and U.S.-controlled financial institution. Even more dangerous to U.S. power is that China is developing trade relations with countries sanctioned by the United States. And they're doing this by barter and direct currency exchanges. This goes around the almighty, all-powerful US dollar. Today, China and a growing number of countries are in an increasingly stronger position to resist US unequal demands. Countries with 3/4 of the world population refuse to go along with the sanctions on Russia, and with a whole array of sanctions. There's sanctions on more than 40 countries. These countries are meeting, strategizing together increasingly. While US strategy is sabotage Taiwan and its trade with China by imposing sanctions and finding an excuse to impose those sanctions. The US is provoking conflict to retain hegemony. This desperate imperialist strategy to reverse their declining global position will disrupt the global economy. Presently, Taiwan's trade with China is far bigger than its trade with the United States. Mainland China and Hong Kong account for 42% of Taiwan's exports last year, while the US had only a 15% share. For Taiwan's imports, mainland China and Hong Kong again ranked first with 22% share. The US had only a 10% share, ranking behind Japan, Europe, and Southeast Asia. This is true throughout the region. Actually, South Korea and Japan have greater trade with China than with the US. So the problem for US imperialists is how to reverse this, how to force countries in the Asia Pacific to act against their own economic interests. The US-NATO war in Ukraine was a strategy to impose sanctions on Russia and break the European Union's trade with Russia. 1 year ago, the EU trade with Russia was 10 times the size of EU trade with the US. Sanctions broke that. War in Ukraine has not defeated Russia, but the economies of Europe have suffered greatly. Inflation, recession, supply chain chaos, due to sanctions that has harshly cut into their own market. So US threats and demands to sanction China will also severely damage the economies of Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines. To force high-tech countries to decouple from the People's Republic of China, US imperialism needs a policy and a military crisis with China. And every US plan for sanctions with China starts with a manufactured crisis over Taiwan. In closing, China's long-held position is that cooperation, trade, and development can overcome differences, that it's the only way forward. People's Republic of China has held a consistent, well-understood position on its sovereignty and territorial integrity that is recognized internationally in all world bodies. China has repeatedly asserted its right to resolve this unfinished national reunification. We know that countless US wars have been based on media-hyped lies that the US is defending freedom, democracy, or a small country from an aggressive attack. This is a lie. US wars are for corporate profit. The preparations of US imperialism for a possible war with China, surrounding it with military bases and nuclear weapons and military vessels, is a highly dangerous provocation. We must oppose it, we must mobilize and declare hands off China. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.